All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're breaking down a really startling claim that's been making the rounds online. The idea that the United States is at this very moment at war with Venezuela. We're going to unpack exactly what this story alleges, piece by piece.
So, right out of the gate, the story hits you with this. It's not a subtle claim. It's a full-on U.S. assault happening on Caracas right now. It's an absolutely massive assertion. So let's look at the specific details this narrative is built on.
Okay, so first up, the narrative really zooms in on the attack itself, laying out some pretty specific claims about how the capital city, Caracas, is being hit. What's really interesting here is the level of detail the source gives. You know, this isn't described as some limited surgical strike. It's painted as a massive, coordinated attack involving Air Force jets, helicopters, even naval missiles, all supposedly aimed at completely wiping out Venezuelan military sites. And it's not just about the military hardware, right? The source paints this picture of total chaos on the ground. It talks about a humanitarian crisis unfolding, with civilians in a state of complete panic, just abandoning their homes and trying to flee the capital to get away from the bombs. Now, to make sense of this alleged attack, the narrative doesn't just present it in a vacuum. It tries to connect the dots by drawing a straight line from past U.S. military actions. It frames what's happening in Venezuela not as some isolated event, but as the latest chapter in a long history of American interventions, putting it right alongside campaigns in Serbia, Iraq, and Libya. So you have to ask, right? An attack on this scale would have to have a powerful motive. The next logical question is why? Why would this be happening? And the source offers its own pretty clear explanation for what's supposedly driving this invasion. And this is where the story presents this massive gap between the official story and what it calls the real story. It claims the public reason is all about stopping drug trafficking, but the narrative argues the true motives are all about geopolitics and money, getting a hold of the world's largest oil reserves, getting rid of a hostile government, and pushing back against Chinese and Russian influence in the region. And to back this up, the source points to what it presents as a kind of smoking gun. It claims that former President Trump actually said out loud that controlling Venezuela's oil was a major goal for the U.S. Now, this story doesn't just stop at Venezuela's borders. According to the source, this alleged attack is sending shockwaves across the entire continent, creating this climate of intense fear and uncertainty. And to really drive home this sense of regional panic, the source includes this pretty dramatic quote. It's supposedly from the president of neighboring Colombia, calling for an emergency UN meeting and basically saying, hey, a nation's capital is being bombed, we need an immediate international response. From there, the source basically predicts a domino effect. It flags Colombia as the next target right after Venezuela. But it also specifies a group of nations it says are safe from US action, creating this clear dividing line across the continent. So why are some countries supposedly at risk, while others are not? Well, according to this narrative, it all comes down to resources. It points to what it calls the lithium triangle. That's Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. The argument is that since these countries are so important for supplying the lithium we all need for batteries, the US actually has a big interest in keeping them stable, so it won't touch them. Okay, so the story lays out the why and the how, but then it pivots to this really critical question. What happens after? The source raises some serious doubts about whether there's any kind of plan for what comes next. And this is the core criticism here, a total lack of strategy. The source claims that even top US officials haven't bothered to sketch out a clear endgame. You know, what does a post-invasion Venezuela even look like once the bombing stops and the government is gone? And this supposed lack of planning, the source argues it fits this all too familiar and pretty destructive pattern. Step 1, an intervention topples a leader. Step 2, this creates a huge power vacuum. And step 3, that vacuum is filled with widespread instability and chaos. And here we go again. The narrative circles right back to history. It warns that without a clear plan, Venezuela is just destined to become another quagmire, echoing the exact same long-term instability that has plagued Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya after similar interventions. So all of this leads to the final section of the narrative, which, doesn't really give us answers. Instead, it leaves us with some huge, unresolved questions about what the future could hold. First up, the big geopolitical question. We know Venezuela has close ties with both China and Russia. So, do these global powers just stand by and watch this happen, or do they step in to defend their ally, which could potentially escalate this into a much, much bigger conflict?
Then there's the second question, and it's a comparison that feels very, very current. Just like Russia has found itself stuck in a long, costly war in Ukraine, could the US get bogged down in its own South American quagmire?
And finally, the story ends by focusing on the man at the very center of this storm. What happens to President Nicolas Maduro? Is he captured? Is he killed? Or does he somehow manage to survive all this? The source leaves that as the ultimate cliffhanger, hanging over this whole story of invasion, fear, and a future that's completely up in the air.